Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. Take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the Level 6 mini-adventure Echoes of War, designed by Maxwell P. Hoiberg for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Echoes of War takes place in the plane of Acheron, which is actually one of the few extraplanar locations I know about, thanks to reviewing one of my favorite products from last year, which is Orant's Guide to the Plains, Acheron. So I was all excited, like, oh, okay, I know about this plane. It's all about warfare and metal, and like the ground is all metal shavings, and there's all these crazy cool creatures, and it's all cubes that like barrel into each other and metal clanging sounds and all this. And I was going into it like, okay, this is a level 6 adventure, and usually you're not going to the plains till you're way higher level. So how, what is the reason and how do we survive going to this cool extra planar excursion at such a relatively low level? And unfortunately, as cool as an idea as it is to take level 6 players to the plane of Acheron, this adventure, it's not bad. It's certainly competent. It's a solid little dungeon crawl. It doesn't feel at all like Acheron, and I struggle to find out a reason why we're going to Acheron. Like, you could put this dungeon, which is basically a temple with a magic sword, that the players are first going to this area to save somebody who was going after the sword, and then once they save the person, they then just continue the quest to go and get this sword. You could easily put this temple anywhere with these same kind of enemies, and it wouldn't really make a difference. So that was really disappointing for me, because I was really excited about this cool setting of using Acheron in this metal world of warfare and cubes and stuff, and none of that really necessarily plays into this adventure, which is a bit of a bummer. It starts out by just getting a quest from a dwarven wizard named Horatio Griswold. Technically, it has multiple adventure hooks, but they're all basically like Griswold is just hiring you to help his friend, who traveled to the plane of Acheron in order to retrieve a magic sword, as adventurers do. I'm not sure why he did this by himself, though. So Griswold can just simply teleport you there, no problem. And you're conveniently teleported the last time apparently they saw this orc adventurer, which is like half an hour away from him, and you only have one encounter in the actual outside of Acheron, which again, there's nothing really, like, no environmental things or anything interesting going on. You can kind of paint the picture about, oh, it's a gray, you can see the metal cubes in the distance, and there's a gray world, and it's a sand, but it's really like metal shavings, but it's just sensory stuff. It doesn't really play into like mechanical differences too much. And then unfortunately, the enemies that are used here are just Dwergar, which Dwergar are a cool enemy because they've got some versatility and especially a lot of stat blocks that I believe were introduced in Mordenkainen's, which this ambush does take advantage of. So the person you're trying to rescue, which is Throdar, is a orc warrior who is trying to retrieve this magic sword, the MacGuffin, and he is beyond this kind of valley, flanked by 2 Dwergar stone guard, and then on this outcropping or mountain area, there's multiple Dwergar stone crafters and another stat block I can't remember, that are just basically ready to ambush anybody who comes and rescues him, I guess. And the idea here is that anybody who is in Acheron for too long just turns to stone. So it wasn't that somebody turned him to stone, it was that he was just eventually turned to stone after he had fought this Irenes, who is also trying to go after the sword, because there's a bit of a backstory with demons invading this area and trying to retrieve this weapon. And she is the only one remaining of her faction. That story kind of plays into when we actually get to the dungeon. But the Dwergar ambush is fine. I like the use of Stone Guard, the Stone Crafters who can activate the Stone Guard. There's a little bit of confusion about the timing of how this works. So Griswold, by the way, brings along his turtle cleric friend, Squirt, which is cute. And they rush forward to try to assist Throdar by casting Greater Restoration. So they've already got the tools. So I'm always leery when the designer introduces essentially a bunch of DM PCs. And I was thinking, okay, maybe the reason these are being added is because we're going to fucking Acheron. Like, this is a very powerful place, and it's a high-level threat. And by giving the party these extra powerful, adventuring NPCs, that's how they survive these threats. Instead, the designer gives you these extra characters and then just pushes them to the side and has them rush forward and basically trigger this ambush. From what I understand, because it says that the Dwerger basically attack as soon as somebody gets near Throdar, and it mentions the fact that as soon as you see him as a statue up ahead, those two rush ahead to rescue him. But weirdly, it says that Griswold will cast Leomin's tiny hut around them to kind of protect them as a way for the DM to basically take them out of the fight and just worry about the Dwerger attacking the party, which is fine, because that's the problem you run into when you're adding a bunch of NPCs is, okay, do we add them to the fight? Does the DM then run them? And is this kind of taking away from the players? My problem is Leomin's Tiny Hut, I'm pretty sure casts 10 minutes, takes 10 minutes to cast, so it's not really an in-combat spell, so I'm not sure how we would allow that to happen necessarily. And it's just weird to give these players these NPCs and then kind of brush them to the side already. And I was initially kind of honestly hoping that we would be using them because we were facing some high-level threats. Instead, we're just fighting Dwergar, which could be, in the Underdark. It could be anywhere in Faerun, frankly. So it's disappointing to me that we get to this cool, like, extra alien dimension, and then we just fight, people that we would be fighting in our home plane anyway, which is a bunch of Dwergar. After the fight, if the players don't have access to Greater Restoration, then the cleric, Turtle Cleric that came along with us can cast Greater Restoration on Throdar and restore him, and then he will explain kind of the situation, which is he battled this Aranese, was basically lost the fight and then turned to stone, because that's what happens in Acheron. And then the players literally just go another, 10 minutes or whatever closer, and then they're at the temple, and it's a dungeon crawl. So you essentially just have this one very conveniently placed, ambush, not scripted encounter, and then you enter the dungeon, and it's a relatively tiny dungeon, and that's basically the entire adventure. The dungeon isn't bad, and you can tell that we get these cool maps, and I really appreciate full color battle map, grid maps, detailed, kind of detailed. This one's empty, you'd have to place in the things yourself, but, we get the webs, and we get the little stone guard here, which is nice. So I really like that. The dungeon is tiny, it's only 5 rooms, but that's fine. It's not meant to be a huge adventure. It's just, the disappointment is, again, we're in Acheron, like, there's all kinds of cool things you can do, and instead we're basically given this kind of generic temple that's got Dwergar ghosts in it, which can be interesting. There's a little bit of a scene there, and if the players then leave that scene, I believe the Dwergar ghosts attack them. The webs are obviously a spider enemy, which are kind of like these devil-spined spiders, which apparently are on the same team as the Aranese. So this is interesting, because usually if you walk into a room and there's a bunch of monsters, close the door and just walk away. You're like, fuck that, I'm not gonna, if there's no treasure in there, then I'm not gonna attack these guys. If you don't do that, then those spiders will actually join the final fight and making the final boss fight a little more challenging. D4 is empty. There is a trap between D1 and D4, which is kind of nice. And then once we get to the final area, it's the classic kind of sword in the stone. The Aranese is trying to get the sword out, but apparently it cannot be even wielded by someone who is of evil alignment, so apparently she did not do her research there. And the pillars cast a silent spell in the middle, which means the players have a great chance of sneaking up on her. And if you remove the sword, it then casts a kind of concussive force spell, and then the whole temple goes down, because it was a load-bearing sword in the stone. Aranese, by the way, are very powerful combatants. When I played through our Tier 3/Tier 4 campaign, War for the Lost Plane, which you can watch all of here on my YouTube channel, an Aranese fight towards the end with just a couple of those, like CR12 freaking Devil Warriors, were probably the most harrowing fight of the entire campaign. Absolutely crazy. So it's interesting here that we're using one as a pretty powerful boss fight, even though you're giving the players all but a certain surprise round, and there's only one of her, and she doesn't have legendary actions or anything, so it's an interesting balancing tool. Now, she is slightly weakened. She's a CR10 instead of a CR12, and the story even mentioned the fact that she was kind of the weakest one of the group, and that's kind of why she ended up surviving. But she is given an extra magic weapon, which is essentially a rope of entanglement that also deals fire damage, which the players can loot afterwards. I'm a big fan, by the way, of enemies that are wielding magic weapons, and then when they drop them, the players then get those weapons. That's a really cool thing for players to not only see the magic weapon in use, but feel a sense of triumph and excitement when they're able to then loot that weapon and use it themselves. So that's a huge thumbs up for me. But that's really the end of the adventure. Like you collect the sword, you go outside, you meet with your buddies, they teleport you back home, and Bob's your uncle. It's only like an 8-page adventure. The other couple pages are all the stat blocks, which I'm glad we get the stat blocks, and I think it's a good use of all these extra Dwerger stats, which is nice. And then we do have actual stats for the sword, so I guess it's not technically a MacGuffin. It does exist as a sword that presumably the players could either keep or they could just give to Throdar and say, all right, this is the sword you were trying to get, I guess. So it's not super satisfying from a story standpoint. It just doesn't have a very compelling story. It's a very basic, simple, like, fetch quest. I guess rescue mission at first and then a fetch quest. Nothing is egregiously wrong with it. The dungeon crawl is very competent and solid. I like the maps. The balance level feels like it's got a decent amount of exploration, socializing. Again, you can rescue Throdar and talk to him. You can actually roll a DC 20 persuasion check on the Dwerger, which surprises me, as usually they're not into the, persuading these enemies. But that is an option, and then you get the information from them before even battling them, or maybe in the middle of battling them, because they are interested in protecting against protecting their temple against this this latest devil incursion. So if the players say, hey, we'll go and beat that devil, then technically the Dwerger will allow you to do that. So it's got all those checkboxes checked, but ultimately I was very disappointed that we just didn't really use this interesting extra planar setting of Acheron, because again, I was very excited to use that. I don't review a whole lot of products that take place outside of the Forgotten Realms, and particularly I was excited about how this adventure would utilize a relatively high-level zone with low-level party members, and it turns out it really, really doesn't. Like, it's just a very relatively simple, straightforward mini-adventure with a dungeon that can unfortunately pretty much take place anywhere. Let's go over my pros and cons for Echoes of War. Pro, a good use of multiple Dwerger stat blocks. So we get the regular Dwerger, we get the Dwerger Stone Crafters, the Dwerger Stone Defenders, which are cool, like giant constructs basically, which are flanking that area and kind of trigger the whole ambush scene, which is nice. And then the Dwerger Ghosts that are in the dungeon itself, which kind of are a scene first and then become a combat encounter. So I'm not a fan of necessarily using Dwerger in Acheron, but if you're going to use them, at least we use a lot of different stat blocks and a lot of different varieties, so I will give a thumbs up to that. Pro, short but solid dungeon crawl. The whole adventure is too short for my taste, but it's got 5 rooms, it's got a trap, it's got some ghosts for social stuff, it's got some enemies, and a kind of decent, what I think is a decent boss fight. It's very hard to judge the balance here. Again, Ernie's are very strong, especially for a level 6 party, but they get the jump on her, and she's by herself unless the spiders join in. Then that could be a really interesting boss fight, but I think it's a fine dungeon. The bummer is this could be not necessarily in Acheron. It could be a dungeon anywhere, just any temple. Pro, full color grid maps with DM and player versions. Super thumbs up, clap of the hands, and big grin for getting official maps. Even though it's a very, very short adventure, I've reviewed products that are 4 times as long as this and don't have any maps whatsoever. So huge thumbs up to that. The con, as I've kind of mentioned again and again, the overall adventure is just too short, and it doesn't utilize that Acheron setting in any kind of meaningful way. I just didn't feel like I was in Acheron, or that anything unique or special was happening there. It feels like we could have teleported to the Underdark, for example, fought the Dwerger that are guarding this temple, and done everything, and just had it be the Underdark. So that was a missed opportunity there for sure. Final verdict, a mini adventure in the Plane of Acheron is a surprise treat for level 6 parties, though Echoes of War is too short and straightforward to take advantage of the extra planar setting. Thank you everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Wizard, Princess, Christopher, Thomas, Captain Mike, Adam, Aiden, Instant Lose, Roger, Stan, Nathan, Alex, Chad, Alexander, and Dan. And gold patrons: RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marco Stade, Vicente, Gilberto, Dead Lizard, Lion, Samara, Slumpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy 619, Skinny Nick, Farty Butterpants, Blood Angel, Veronis, Baboon, Nathan, and Fast Like a Tortoise. Thank you all very much for your support.